Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. Nuclear negotiations between the U.S. and Iran resumed in Oman on Friday. In this episode, we'll be breaking down what we learned from this initial round of talks, some regional reactions, and what comes next, hearing from Washington and regional correspondents alike. Hope you enjoy. Okay, so here's what happened in Oman. An Iranian delegation led by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held indirect talks with an American delegation headed by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Iranian diplomats Majid Takhravanchi and Kazem Garibabadi were there alongside Araghchi, while President Donald Trump's advisor and son-in-law Jared Kushner, as well as U.S. Central Command Chief Admiral Brad Cooper, rounded out the American delegation. Araghchi told the Iranian press that the talks had gotten off to a, quote, good start. He said the two sides agreed to continue talking, but would consult their respective governments on how to proceed. Araghchi added, quote, if this trend persists, we can reach a solid framework for future talks in next sessions. Omani Foreign Minister Badr el-Busaidi said in a post on X that the talks were, quote, very serious, and that he expected them to resume soon. A bit of context, the last time the two sides held negotiations was in May of last year. The following month, Israel launched what became known as the 12-day war with Iran, and the talks fell apart. The U.S. also bombed 3 Iranian nuclear facilities in the conflict before negotiating a ceasefire. In recent weeks, Trump has upped the pressure on Iran, threatening to bomb them over the killing of Iranian protesters, and then vowing to do so if they do not come to a new nuclear deal. The quest for a new deal faces a lot of hurdles. The U.S. wants any new agreement to additionally address Iran's ballistic missiles program and support for regional proxies, like the Houthis in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon. The 2015 nuclear agreement, which was negotiated by President Barack Obama's administration and exited by Trump in 2018, solely addressed the nuclear issue. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also said recently that a new agreement should tackle Iran's, quote, treatment of their own people, a reference to the recent crackdown on protesters and rioters, which has left thousands dead, according to Iranian rights groups. Before the talks had even started, Iranian officials were drawing lines on the negotiating terms. Senior security official Ali Shamkhani said earlier in the week that Iran would not agree to send any enriched uranium abroad. This proposal has been floated by Russia recently. Al Monitor's diplomatic correspondent, Elizabeth Hagedorn, has been tracking the road to these talks for weeks. Here's what she said about the significance of the negotiations resuming, as well as the severe challenges ahead and the potential scenarios if, or perhaps when, they fall apart.
The talks were significant, if for no other reason than they marked the first negotiations since the U.S. bombed Iran's nuclear sites in June, and since Iran carried out a deadly crackdown on its protesters last month. You had in Oman on Friday President Trump's top negotiators Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and somewhat unusually, they were joined by CENTCOM Commander Brad Cooper. On the Iranian side, the lead negotiator was Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, who left the talks sounding somewhat upbeat. Now, that the Iranians are speaking in positive terms about the talks is perhaps unsurprising. Many analysts would say their goal here, at least in the short to medium term, is to keep these negotiations going and to deter U.S. military action that Trump has repeatedly threatened. As of this recording, we have not heard from the Trump administration formally on the talks, but I would expect a much more measured statement from them if and when we do get one. That's because there is very little, if any, overlap in the two sides' positions. The Iranians came to the negotiating table on Friday, refusing to discuss anything but their nuclear program. And the Americans want a deal that not only addresses Iran's uranium enrichment capabilities and stockpiles, but also its missile program and support for regional militias. The Iranians have said they refuse to negotiate on those latter issues. And when it comes to their nuclear program, while they may be willing to make some concessions, they still refuse to give up what they say is their right to uranium enrichment. So it's hard to know what to make of this opening round of talks. It's certainly possible that they continue after both sides go back and consult with their capitals. But I will say the belief by many in both Tehran and Washington is that These talks could just be a ruse until the U.S. is ready to carry out inevitable strikes on Iran, and time will tell.
Let's delve more into the Iranian side. In an upcoming piece, Al Monitor's correspondent in Tehran wrote that there is growing hardline skepticism in Iran about the talks, contrasting this with the optimism expressed by Araghchi. The correspondent wrote that state media referred to Cooper's presence as, quote, psychological warfare, adding that hardline factions remain doubtful as to whether negotiations will work, believing the projection of military strength will better shape the outcome. Here's an excerpt from the article read by my colleague, Rosaline Carroll.
Despite Araghchi's cautiously positive tone, hardline factions in Tehran remain deeply skeptical. They believe that diplomacy is unlikely to succeed under pressure, insisting that military strength and not negotiations will ultimately shape outcomes. They also framed the Muscat talks as a test of whether Washington is willing to move away from its strategy of combining pressure with diplomacy, warning that turning negotiations into a tool of coercion reduces the chances of a lasting agreement.
For more from our correspondent in Tehran, visit almonitor.com. Shifting to the region, Israel is without a doubt watching the talks closely. Here's Al Monitor's Israel Pulse chief, Rina Bassist, on why Israel is not completely content with the negotiations, preferring stronger action, and how that differs from the U.S. approach.
It is not a secret that what Israel would like to see is not negotiations between Washington and Tehran. Rather, it aspires for the toppling of the regime. This is what the Mossad chief David Barnea, military intelligence chief Shlomi Binder, Tzal chief Eyal Zamir, all three of them lobbied for in the recent visits to DC over the past 2 weeks. Now, evidently, the Americans are not embracing the Israeli position, and more so, talks seems to be going in a very different direction compared to what Israel was hoping for. Israel would like to see a comprehensive negotiations with everything on the table, including zero enrichment, including the Iranian ballistic missile project. Obviously, Israel is very concerned in which directions these talks are really going.
By the way, when Rina referred to Tzahal, that's an acronym for the Israel Defense Forces. Now let's hear Rina go over the limits of Israeli influence over the Trump administration with regards to the Iran diplomacy.
In reality, Israel has very little clout over the American position. More than that, if Israel insists too strongly, too publicly, it would be accused of trying to drag the Americans, drag the Trump administration into war. MAGA seniors, be it Steve Bannon, be it Tucker Carlson, both have already warned against an quote-unquote Israeli interest policy. That is why the Israeli government must be very careful and very cautious on lobbying towards for an American strike. They must stay very discreetly about that. What they can do is continue to offer the American security agencies more intelligence on Iranian tensions, on Iran capabilities. The fact that the talks are now taking place in Oman, that's a very unpleasant reminder for Israel of the talks that took place in 2013 ahead of the JCPOA deal. At the time, the Obama administration completely sidelined Israel. It did not divulge. It was negotiating with Iran, and it was at the time the Israeli Mossad that uncovered the fact that both sides were negotiating. Obviously, Israel fears that, again, not secretly this time, but again, the American administration would sideline the Israeli position.
I'm going to add a bit of context to what Rina said regarding domestic politics on the American right. Tucker Carlson has indeed been critical of the Trump administration's policy. He came out strongly against a U.S. strike on Iran last year, saying it would lead to a total war. This, of course, did not happen. He's also been very critical of Israel, and I should note his statements on the country have been challenged, most recently by U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee. But Tucker continues to have an audience with Trump. He most recently visited the White House in January, hence what Rina said about Israel being cautious about lobbying for military action out of fear of provoking a backlash in Trump's orbit. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more after this short break.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25 for a discount.
Okay, we're back. In terms of Gulf states, Qatar's foreign ministry issued a statement saying they welcomed the resumption of U.S.-Iran talks and expressing, quote, hope that they will lead to a comprehensive agreement. Remember, Iran struck the U.S.'s El Udeid base in Qatar last June in response to the American strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. That situation is something Qatar, which has historically been immune to the security chaos in the region, wants to avoid in the future. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates had not commented on the talks by the time of recording Friday afternoon East Coast U.S. time. UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed met German Chancellor Friedrich Merz on Friday, and the readout mentioned they discussed regional issues, but there was no explicit mention of the U.S.-Iran negotiations. It is worth noting that Saudi Arabia and the UAE share Qatar's security concerns. Both Riyadh and Abu Dhabi issued statements recently saying they would not allow their airspaces to be used for any attack on Iran. Now, the UAE has long had working ties with Iran despite its relations with Israel. Saudi Arabia was a regional foe of Iran for years, and arguably still is, but the kingdom has opted for dealing with Iran diplomatically since they resumed ties in a China-brokered deal in 2023. Turkey was actually hoping to host the talks itself before Oman became the venue. But instead of getting into that, I direct you to our last episode with Al Monitor's correspondent in Ankara, Ezgi Akin. Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Be sure to follow Al Monitor for more on the stories impacting the Middle East. Until next time, I'm Adam Lucente.